Yo tomo mi café en la madrugada.
Ay, 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 ronca pues sabroso para beber ya.
Óyele, caramba, qué sabroso que yo tomo mi café en la madrugada.
Ay, 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 ronca pues sabroso para beber ya.
Lo tomo a medianoche, lo tomo en la madrugada. Yo lo tomo a toda hora para que lo tome usted también.
Ay, 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 ronca pues sabroso para beber ya.
Lelelele, óyele, caramba, qué sabroso que yo tomo mi café en la madrugada.
Welcome to Lessons from Central American Resistance and Diasporic Solidarity, which is a report back on the recent congressional delegation titled Unearthing the Real Root Causes of Mass Migration from Central America. I'm your host, Sussan Garcia, who I was born and raised in Connercy Land, which is known as New York City in the US. I'm Guatemalan, and I'm here at this event by way of my work through Central American Disruption, which is a digital platform focusing on radical education and community building for the Central American diaspora in the global north. I'm here by, way of a very special invitation from comrades and inspirational people from historic solidarity organizations that have been doing the work for generations now, ever since, earlier generations of Central Americans first starting arriving to the US and the global north in the 70s and the 80s. And so I'm, different from everyone else that you'll be hearing speaking on this panel because everyone else was on the delegation and involved with planning the delegation. I'm simply here as a host. I was not involved with the planning of the delegation. And so in the past few days, but also throughout this event, I'm going to be learning alongside y'all with the audience about what happened in the delegation, the reflections from the people in the delegation. And so I hope y'all are ready to learn. I'm here to learn as well. And I'm ready, towards the end, we'll have space to reflect and share that. So I'm really looking forward to this event. And again, thank you all for inviting me to this space. And thank you all for everyone who's here right now. Again, ready to learn and engage with each other. So as a reminder as well as to, how we want the space to be, we're very intentional in centering and uplifting the voices of the diaspora, as well as people in Central America. A lot of us, we are from Central America and the Caribbean. A lot of us have either lived there in the past or currently live there. But either way, we have connections and commitments to our communities in Central America, in the US, the global north, and so forth. And so we're very happy that our allies and comrades are here to learn, to listen, and if when you're compelled, right, we invite you to respectfully share your reactions and responses in the chat. Now, moving on to the agenda, what we're doing today. So this event, unfortunately, is only an hour and a half because this can go on for weeks. But first, you'll hear what the delegation was all about, who participated, and why it was such a historic moment, especially considering the ties between the US and Central America. Then we're going to break into smaller discussion rooms where our speakers will get into detailed reflection, share lessons from the delegation, and make connections to the work and experiences more broadly. Finally, after this breakout rooms, which will be roughly around 45 minutes, we're going to reconvene back here, share our final thoughts and reflections from the discussions, and kind of share our key takeaways and key actions that our other panelists will share. And so before we do that, I'm going to introduce, who you're going to be hearing from today and how are they here. So we'll be hearing from people from CSPES, which is the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, from CRLN, the Chicago Religious Leadership Network on Latin America, IFCLA, the Interfaith Committee on Latin America, NISQUA, Network in Solidarity with the People of Guatemala, SOA Watch, School of America's Watch, WFPSC, which is the Witness for Peace Solidarity Collective. And again, these are people who have been doing the work for decades. These are truly people who have been inspiring us for decades now. And we'll be hearing from specifically people Carla Cativo, Yesenia Portillo, Jonathan Gomez, Angel Flores Fontanes, Edna Sandoval, Lulu Matute, Maria Jose Mendez Gutierrez, Alison Lira, and me, your host, Sussan Garcia. So before we go into breakout rooms, as I said, we're going to be hearing an overview about the delegation. So I'll hand it off now to Lulu Matute, and then afterwards, Maria Jose Mendez. They're both from the Honduran diaspora, and Lulu comes from the School of the Americas Watch, and Maria Jose comes from Witness for Peace Solidarity Collective.
And thank you all. First and foremost, I want to express my gratitude for everyone on this call today, everyone in the background who's working tech, interpretation, and to our audience members. You know, you could be anywhere on the internet or anywhere in the streets, but you're here with us today, and we so appreciate your time. So it means the world to us. Special shout out to friends, family, mentors, community who I see coming in. Kristen Serra, Dana Frank, Una Valle. I see Emily Ryan, who was also an interpreter on delegation. So special shout out, saludos y abrazos. And I want to share a bit about the delegation. We're going to share some pictures. A lot of these images were taken by our good compa, who was also on the delegation, Roderico, and he's from Ishemche Media, and we'll also share that link. Now, if I can invite tech support to share some pictures. All right, let me take you through a bit of the delegation, and in the next part of this event, we'll get into discussion groups where we'll get a little deeper into the conversations, but I want to give you an overview. So the first thing we did, first and foremost, as Sussan mentioned, this is we are representatives of historic US-based solidarity organizations. And we have the honor of representing our communities as members of the diaspora of first, second generation Central Americans in the US, being stateside. And we were joined by several members of US Congress, including Representative Ilan Omar, Rep. Cori Bush from Missouri, who is a registered nurse and came out of the Black Lives Matter movement. We were there with Representative Chuy Garcia, Rep. Jamal Bowman from New York, and as well as a staffer in the office of Jan Chakowski, Kate. Now, after the delegates arrived in Honduras, scorching heat, we boarded this stuffy little bus. We passed out baleadas and coffee all around, and the first stop was to the President's Palace in Tegucigalpa. So we met with Honduran President Xiomara Castro and with members of her cabinet. Can I get a slide change, please? I want to share these pictures with you all. So after the meeting with the president, with Presidenta Xiomara Castro, it was an honor to meet her. We met with the president and Foreign Affairs Committee of the Honduran National Congress. And this picture over to the left-hand side was taken between Majo and I. And the picture on the right it's just this tragic comedy, right? But there's a picture of all the previous presidents of Honduras. And I had to snap this picture really quickly. It's a picture of Juan Orlando Hernandez. So while we're having this conversation with US members of US Congress, with representatives of historic solidarity organizations, there's a painting of Juan Orlando Hernandez while he's also on his way to New York facing extradition, right? So that was happening in real time. And that's right, se fue. All right, let's do a slide change and I'll take you through the next piece. So once we leave the capital, we head to higher ground, so higher elevation in Honduras, land of coffee, mushrooms, much cooler weather. And we visited the Copin community. We visited the grave of internationally recognized Indigenous leader Berta Cáceres, who was assassinated in 2016 for opposing a US-backed hydroelectric project. And we heard from her organization, we heard from her daughter, who's continuing that leadership with the community Copin. And we learned about the continued impunity enjoyed by the very powerful actors who were ultimately responsible for her assassination. And we know that 3 of those found guilty for Cáceres murders to date have received training in US military institutions. Now, even though we did not get to travel to El Salvador, we did convene with Salvadoran civil society groups that were in Honduras for a binational gathering between groups in Honduras and groups in El Salvador. And our delegation had the opportunity to join on the second day of that gathering. So we were able to hear from Salvadoran partners on the ground. Now, we don't have any pictures, and this is an important distinction between Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And part of that is that in Honduras and El Salvador, communities were very open and want to share their stories and want the publicity. They want us to be in conversation. But the case in El Salvador is a lot more complicated, and there were a lot of security issues. So those meetings were closed door meetings, but we did have the opportunity to hear from folks on the ground there. And again, we'll get deeper into those conversations and discussions when we go into the breakout rooms. Now, if I may have another slide, please. I'll take you back down to the coast. So after we leave the highlands in Honduras, we came back down to the Caribbean coast and we visited OFRANE, the Fraternal Black Organization of Honduras. The first thing we noticed coming in was that there were Honduran military personnel outside of this meeting room. So there's round-the-clock surveillance for this organizing community in the coast of Honduras. As soon as you cross that threshold, we're military stationed outside. You hear the drums, you hear the maracones, and throughout the day, we heard very many testimonies from Garifuna community throughout the Caribbean coast. Testimonies of violence, of forced disappearances of members in the Garifuna community. Now, Reps Omar, Bush, and Bowman are members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and they made connections about the impacts of the war on drugs, militarization, and state violence in Black communities in the US, as is the case for Afro-Indigenous and Indigenous communities in Honduras. May I have another slide, please? All right, and while we were there, we went to several different communities, including Tornabe, and we heard from Ofrane and as to how the ancestral lands of the Garifuna people have been affected by agro-fuel plantations and tourist projects. This including a Hilton hotel with an 18-hole golf course. We also were visited by a delegation from the Mesquitia people who were victims of the May 2012 US Drug Enforcement Administration killings in Aguas. They joined Ofrane in sharing their testimonies of loss and their ongoing struggle for justice. Now, though there was a lot of grief and pain and surveillance in this space where Ofrane was gathered, there was also music and there was prayer, there was memory, there was that continued commitment to struggle, to solidarity work. There was pan de coco, there was fresh fish, and there was pipipi. So there was, it was a beautiful struggle to be in community and to share that with Comunidad there. Moving on. The delegation also visited communities organizing to defend the Jilamito River from a hydroelectric project that is to be financed by IDB Invest, which is a multilateral development bank of which the US is the largest shareholder. We saw firsthand how international economic development financing can benefit local elites and how international corporations benefit rather than those who need it most. Now, MAJ, the agrarian platform, they shared their many years of struggle to defend cooperative land titles in the Bajo Aguan region, where powerful agricultural business actors who are also backed by military and paramilitary forces, they often use US training and financing to forcibly displace local community from the land. Now, moving on to the next slide, please. And we met with Guapinol River defenders who shared about their struggles against Los Pinares mining project in Carlos Escaleras National Park. And that the 8 water defenders who had recently been released after 914 days in prison have only been granted provisional freedom. So we learned more about their cases and their experiences. We did have the honor of breaking bread with those community members near the shores of Tela Honduras. And for our last meeting in Honduras, we met with Berta Oliva of the Committee of the Relatives of the Detained and Disappeared of Honduras, COFADE, and she shared about the struggles for justice for victims of human rights violations following the 2009 military coup and during the subsequent US-backed regimes, which included Juan Orlando's 2 terms. Right, moving on, please. I'll be brief with Guatemala. The delegation met with reps from the Association of Justice and Reconciliation, the Center for Legal Action on Human Rights, and the Association of Relatives of the Detained Disappeared in Guatemala. They shared about current legal cases for crimes against humanity committed by US-backed Guatemalan state forces in the 1980s, including the Ixil genocide case and the military diary case, which includes charges for enforced disappearance, sexual violence, and other crimes against humanity. Judge Pablo Chitumul spoke with the delegation about attacks on judicial independence only 2 days after being removed from his position by the Guatemalan Supreme Court of Justice. This removal is widely recognized as a blatant act of criminalization towards Judge Chitumul, who issued historic sentences in the Molina Thyssen transnational justice case and the Magic Water corruption case against former Guatemalan VP Roxana Valdetti. His removal was the latest in a pattern of attacks against independent judges and prosecutors. And members of the peaceful resistance in La Puya, yeah, this is La Puya resistance camp, and they have been holding it down for a decade. We met with them and learned about how they've been able to maintain a resistance movement for a decade at the entrance of Progreso de Vida mine, owned by a Nevada-based mining company called Capes and Cassidy and Associates, KCA. The local community members in La Puya expressed their commitment to defending their scarce water resources from the devastating impacts of mining. They also shared their experiences of criminalization and police repression. Now, to underscore the injustices of the arbitration suit that KCA has brought against the Guatemalan government for over $400 million under the terms of CAFTA-DR. And this is an open pit on your screen over to the right. The water has been contaminated, and that's just left to evaporate and to be absorbed into the soil, contaminating local groundwater. The delegation continued and was welcomed by a large turnout of the peaceful resistance of Santa Rosa Jalapa and Jutiapa at the permanent resistance camp that was erected in 2017 to halt mine-related traffic to the Escobal silver mine, owned by Canadian-US company Pan American Silver. The delegation also met with Maya and Xinca ancestral authorities from across Guatemala, as well as several Guatemalan congresswomen who shared analysis on Guatemalan history and current events, including an analysis of systemic corruption, impunity, and racism, and how extractivism and privatization are the root causes of forced migration. We also met with communities affected by the Chicxoy Dam. We met with the delegation to discuss the ongoing effects of the dam's construction and their leadership on the issues of reparations for Indigenous communities. Now, again, we'll go deeper into conversation in our breakout rooms, but I'm going to turn it over to Sussan and Maho to speak more as to how the U.S. is responding to migration and how it connects to the delegation.
And thank you, Lulu, for taking us on this powerful journey that allowed those of us who were there and also those of us who are not there to relive the special moments we shared during this exciting delegation. So let me tell you a little bit more about the delegation. This will be brief so that we have time to discuss a bit more in depth in the breakout rooms. The delegation we participated on was named Unearthing the Real Root Causes of Mass Migration from Central America. And it was partly a reaction to the US strategy for addressing the root causes of migration in Central America. So let me tell you a bit about this strategy. This strategy is the Biden-Harris administration's blueprint for dealing with irregular migration coming from the region. And it identifies corruption, violence, poverty, crime as some of the major reasons why Hondurans, Guatemalans, and Salvadorans are leaving their countries. And to address these problems, the strategy proposes various solutions. And some of them include mobilizing private sector investment, addressing, creating anti-corruption task forces, and also professionalizing security forces in the three countries. And this plan, it seems nuanced, a plan that seeks to address the root causes of migration. Sounds like a nuanced plan, right? And also in light of the Trump administration's more reactive and punitive approach to migration, it's a plan that seems to differ greatly from that kind of agenda. Trump administration's agenda included family separations. So there's a sense that this plan is much better than what we had in the past and what the US had in the past. However, this strategy is still part of a long-term bipartisan strategy to secure US hegemony in the region. And more problematically, it also ignores the role that the United States has played in perpetuating many of the problems that it identifies in the region as being some of the root causes. So one key takeaway of our trip to Central America was that the solutions that are proposed in this plan are paradoxically some of the drivers of migration. So that the root causes and also the solutions that are proposed to these root causes within this plan are actually some of what is driving people to migrate. And this is a bit paradoxical, so let me unfold this with examples from the delegation. During this trip, we heard from courageous land defenders in Honduras and Guatemala about how US-backed mega development projects, for instance, such as hydroelectric dams and also mine projects, have resulted in mass impoverishment and also tremendous communal displacement. And this taught us that the private investment solution that is at the core of the current Biden-Harris administration's plan to address migration is very problematic because it's an approach that the US is proposing as a solution to migration, but it's really a continuation of what the United States has been doing for decades in Central America. And what has the US been doing for decades in Central America? It has been promoting neoliberal experiments that largely benefit private sectors and private investors at the expense of impoverished workers and peasants, many of whom are indigenous. So when we met with COPIN in Honduras, for example, and we shared some of the content of the strategy, it's also interesting to know that a lot of the partners, the popular social movements we met with, had no idea what was contained in this plan. And when we shared some of the, especially this aspect about private investment being seen as a solution to migration, one member expressed something that I think really just captures what some of us felt about this plan. When we were discussing this with them, he said, "Oh, we're screwed." So our trip has really encouraged this critical attitude towards the Biden-Harris plan to address migration in Central America. And so today we want to reflect on some of our reservations based on the generous conversations that various grassroots movements and political leaders had with us during our trip. So let's move to that, and I'll hand it over to Sussan.
Thank you so much, Maria Jose. So as y'all can probably see, right, from what Lulu and Maria Jose just shared, I mean, this delegation is unique. Usually, delegations from political delegations from the US to Central America is just in their own circle, people with no real connections to the region are consulted or anything. But this time we see that a lot of people from the diaspora and historic solidarity movements with ties to Central America very much led, who they were going to talk to. And for me, hearing that they met with Miriam Miranda, with Copin, with Ofrane, with Guapino land defenders, the land defenders in Guate, and of course other leaders in El Salvador. This is historic. This is special. And so obviously the breakout rooms will go into a lot more depth into this. And I mean, I'm very hyped for it. I hope y'all are as well. So as a reminder, so there's 3 breakout rooms. Each one has the same questions and same themes that are going to be covered, but there are 3 different speakers in each room, so they will vary a little bit. We will be there in 45 minutes, and then we'll come back and share our reflections. So I'll see y'all soon. We should be allocated to our breakout rooms now.